Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. People will be able to still join as we're going. So let's go ahead and get started. We do have a pretty full agenda. So let me start by welcoming you all. Good morning and welcome again to the ARG Adult Reentry Grant Bidders Conference. My name is Tanya Hill. I am the field representative assigned to the ARG program. We are going to be recording this meeting, and the PowerPoint and the recording will be available shortly following the presentation. I'll be leading the PowerPoint with the support of our research staff, and we'll be addressing some of the key components of your RFP. I will be pausing throughout the presentation for questions, so please feel free to type your questions about the topics we're discussing at any time into the chat box, or you can email them to the ARG Warm Handoff mailbox, which is argwarmhandoff@bscc.ca.gov, and I'll have that on the slide shortly. You can also use the raise your hand feature on your Zoom video or phone if you are calling into this meeting. If you are calling in, please use *9 to raise your hand, and the BSCC staff will call out the phone number that you're calling from when it's your turn to speak and ask your question. To mute and unmute your microphone, please use *6, and we will be able to lower your hands once your question has been addressed. BSCC staff will also be monitoring the request to speak throughout the meeting, so please be patient. We will get to all of your questions throughout this meeting. If you would, in the next few minutes, if you have not done so already, please use the chat feature to introduce yourself and your organization. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So some of the things we'll be looking at today, we'll be talking about a little bit about the BSCC. We will be sharing with you about the Adult Reentry Grant Project. We'll give you a little bit of information about the ESC, how that works, and the benefits of the ESC and the scoring panel. We will walk specifically through your request for proposals and give you a good overview of what that's going to look like and entail. And then we'll talk to you about the rating process. Our research staff will share that with you. And then we'll be going through the specific components of the RFP, and we'll share with you about the proposal instructions, how to get your proposal submitted. I do want to take a moment and introduce our ARG team. As I've said myself, I'm Tanya Hill, the field representative. We also have Aaron McGuire, our general counsel. Aaron, are you on the call?
I'm here, Tanya. Hi.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you. I would like to introduce Ricardo Goodridge, our deputy director.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today.
The ARG team, program analyst, Adriana Regalado.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome.
Program analyst, Veronica Silva.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating today.
Program analyst, Danielle Feist.
Good morning, everybody.
And our research data specialist, Ashley Vanderpool. Oh, Garibaldi, sorry.
Good morning, everybody.
So again, if you need to submit any questions, if you're not using the chat, if you want to submit questions via the email, that is the email on the screen for you now, the ARG Warm Handoff @bscc.ca.gov. I would also like to make sure to give a special thanks to the ARG team. They'll be assisting us behind the scenes, monitoring for your questions and making sure that your experience here with us today goes smoothly. And I also want to send a big, big thanks to our IT person, Sean Moore, who has been delightful to help us get this event off the ground. So, and I also want to send a hearty thank you and appreciation to the CPGP field rep team for all of their help and support in putting this conference together. Helene Zentner, Tim Pulaski, and others, everyone who's just been greatly supportive in helping us get this going. So we'll start with a little bit of an introduction to the BSCC, who we are. We are a agency that reports directly to the governor's office. We are organized under the governor. We are made up of a board that has 13 members that are appointed by the governor and other types of appointments. Some of the responsibilities that we do, our main focus is to provide statewide leadership. We provide technical assistance to support our partnerships with criminal justice, adult and juvenile, and to really just support how we're moving things forward in the state of California, monitoring facilities and different things like that. There are 5 divisions of the BSCC. We have the Facility Standards and Operation Division, or the FSO division. They are the group that's responsible for doing inspections of the jails, adult jails, prisons, and juvenile facilities throughout the state. They monitor for regulations and compliance that those facilities have with the rules and the laws of the state. Our Standards and Training for Corrections, our STC unit, they are responsible for the selection and training and standards for correctional officers throughout the state. Corrections Planning and Grant Programs, that's the division that we are here, and we provide millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding to support the goals and objectives of the state in terms of addressing various programs and building out our policy as it relates to criminal justice involved events for both youth and juvenile, both state and federal grants is what we manage here at the CPGP. We have our County Facilities Construction Division, the CFC, and they are responsible for overseeing financing for facilities.
Is it just cycling? Because hello, you there?
Thank you. The CFC division is responsible for overseeing the financing of facilities to include jails, renovations of jails, and building and construction of new correctional facilities as well. And one of our most important units would be the Administration, Research, and Program Support. And they are responsible for doing all of the wonderful things that you all will need to, they review all of the information and help us support data collection, research, and of course, our much needed IT support and things like our accounting and people like that are involved in our administration division. So a little bit about the Adult Reentry Grant Program. The Adult Reentry Grant was established in the Budget Act of 2018, and the goal of that project was to provide funding for community-based organizations to be able to deliver reentry services for people who are formerly incarcerated or who were formerly incarcerated in state prison. The Budget Act of 2018 started with sorry, don't know what happened. The Budget Act of 2018 started with an appropriation of $50 million, and that was divided into 3 different pots of money. We created the rental assistance part of it, we created the rehabilitation of existing property, and we created the warm handoff component. In that first round of funding, we allocated $25 million for rental assistance, $15 million for rehab, and $9.3 million for warm handoff. The Budget Act of 2019 appropriated an additional $32,950,000, and that was divided by in between rental and warm handoff. 40.6 million went to rental assistance, and 25 million went to warm handoff. The Budget Act of 2020 appropriated another 37 million, and that's the funds that you guys are competing for today. Okay. The 2021 funds are to be allocated as follows. We had $17,575,000 allocated for rental assistance, and those funds were awarded in August 2020 via a separate process. We have $17,575,000 for warm handoff, which is the funds that you all are competing for now. And then we have $1.85 million to BSCC for administrative costs and to report on program outcomes. Since its establishment in 2018, the Adult Reentry Grant Program has been able to award $58,226,250 to at least 23 community-based organizations who are providing services in the community for rental assistance projects. We were able to award so far $25,001,250 for warm handoff services, and we have 53 CBOs so far in that component of the project. And then we had one single award for the rehabilitation of existing property in the amount of $5 million. So you can see that we have been able to get some funds out there and start getting some things done and impacting the community to help folks who are returning back home. The next step to understand about our process is the Executive Steering Committee process. Pursuant to SB 840, which is the legislation that initiated the Adult Reentry Grant, and SB 89, which is the legislation that authorizes the funds for this 2020-2021 competitive process. The BSCC was required to convene an ESC with members from relevant state agencies and departments with expertise in public health, housing, workforce development, and effective rehabilitative treatment for adult offenders, as well as representatives of reentry-focused community-based organizations and criminal justice impacted individuals. And this diverse group of people are tasked with developing grant program criteria and making recommendations to the board.
Tanya, you were muted.
Yeah, my apologies.
Okay, yeah, I keep getting muted. I'm like, what's happening? I keep getting muted. Okay, thank you. So the diverse group of people that make up the Executive Steering Committee is responsible for developing the grant program criteria and making recommendations to the board regarding grant award decisions. Okay, oh, there we go. And so what the ESC does when they do come together is they will get together and they will talk in detail about, they'll look at the legislation or they'll look at any previous RFPs that have been developed, and they'll talk in detail about how to best create a proposal for you all to compete and what needs to be included in there to make sure that the overall goal of the legislation is met. They will determine what applicants need to do in order to submit their application and make sure everything is included that the committee will need to be able to make good decisions. The ESC will create those factors, the rating factors that we'll talk about in a little while, that's used to evaluate your proposals. The ESC will also rate your proposals. Once they come in, the ESC would read them and rate them and provide the scores. And those are the scores that are used to make the funding recommendations to the board. Now, in this specific instance for the project that you all are competing for, because the RFP was just created in 2019, there were no substantive changes that were needed. So we did not use a new ESC. The board granted us approval. We just made some technical changes and edits, updated the dates and things like that. And then that is the RFP that you are actually competing in. So since we do not have an ESC for this process, to be able to rate and score your proposals, the board will be convening a scoring panel. And the scoring panel, The scoring panel will be trained in the RFP. They'll know the RFP front and back like you should also. And their goal will be to select the best proposals, score them out, and rank them. They are to use a process that is transparent and fair to all, which is the reason we share this with you, so you know exactly what we're doing. And they use the accepted measurement principles, meaning they're utilizing the standard rating factors that our research team has worked hard to develop. And they want to make sure that all of the applicants are being treated fairly and that any process that we use will withstand challenges. So that scoring panel is going to convene, read all of your proposals, rate them, and then they will be the panel that makes the recommendations for funding to the board. Are there any questions so far? Adriana, Danielle, you're doing the chat, right? Any
Yes.
questions?
So I see one question just popped up. Sorry, the chat's going a little crazy. It says we follow a housing first model in our housing program as far as is allowed by parole. But since this proposal will be addressing other reentry services primarily, how do we highlight our housing first philosophy as requested?
That's a great question. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about housing first. A little further in, actually in the next segment, we are going to talk some more about housing first. So if you don't feel like your question is answered when we discuss housing first, we'll circle back to it, but I think you'll get what you need. You'll get your question answered when we talk about housing first in that segment.
I have a couple more questions. How many grants will be awarded?
We have $500,000 is available per applicant. If every applicant applied for $500,000 and was awarded $500,000, we would be able to award up to 35, but it'll depend on how many people are actually applying, and it'll depend on what those amounts are that they're asking for.
Another question is, does sitting on Community Corrections Partnership Board present a conflict of interest?
Say that one more time.
Does sitting on the Community Corrections Partnership Board present a conflict of interest?
I will defer to our legal counsel, Aaron, to clarify that or respond to that question.
Yeah, Tanya, at the outset, I don't think it should present a conflict.
Okay.
We can't provide exact legal advice to applicants. They have to work with their own legal counsel to some extent. But having a tie into the local CCP or the CCP process, because this money doesn't flow through the CCPs and the CCPs are not being asked to make any recommendations with this funding, I don't see a conflict at the outset.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. And I will add in there as well, when we talked about the Executive Steering Committee, the original Executive Steering Committee, and that list is in your RFP in your appendix. But the folks who join the Executive Steering Committee and the folks who join the scoring panel will not be allowed to compete for funds. But because, like Aaron said, those in the CCP are not directly, the conflict of interest is probably not going to be the same. Now, those folks or the organizations represented by those folks that were on the initial ESC, they will not be disqualified from competing in this round of funding because we did not convene a new ESC for this process. They were not allowed to compete for funding, or their organizations were not allowed to compete for funding in the first round. But in the second round, that ESC group would be allowed to compete. Any other questions in the chat?
I have a few more. So this question was asked a couple times. It's asking if we're going to be able to provide them a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, the PowerPoint and the recording will be posted on our website probably by early next week.
Another question, how much do the employment placement services factor into the grant?
It is absolutely up to you to decide how to structure your project. And it's totally up to you to decide where you place value on the various components. And we are going to talk in detail about like the eligible services, so you may get a little better feel for that response as we get a little further into the presentation as well.
I have some more questions. Does the provider have to be able to offer transitional housing or permanent housing, or is linkage and warm handoff to housing providers who follow the Housing First model sufficient?
Great question. This is the warm handoff, so the focus here is on supportive services. The rental assistance funding is where we're really digging into providing more direct rental assistance support. So for the warm handoff, it is absolutely appropriate to be providing warm handoff services to include linkages to housing or other supportive services that are required.
And then one more question, I think it's piggybacking off of the employment placement services factors and how it factors into the grant. They're asking, can it be totally career and employment services for the grant?
Can you ask that again, please?
It says, can it be totally career and employment services for the grant?
What do you mean by totally? Are they asking if the program that they create, can it totally just focus on employment services?
I think that's what they're getting at with that question.
If that is
yes,
the
it
question,
says yes.
Okay, if that is the question, again, it's totally up to you to how you present your proposal. The scoring panel is going to look at, and when we get into the actual components of the application, you'll see what kinds of questions we're asking you to respond to as you describe what your project is going to be. And so what's going to make the difference is how well you're able to demonstrate to the scoring panel how whatever project you're presenting, the value that it's bringing to the community and why your project should be funded.
And that concludes all the questions that I see so far.
Okay, thank you. Anything?
Oh wait, one just, sorry,
no,
one just more popped up when I said that. Will there be a Zoom presentation to the panel? To
the scoring panel?
Nathaniel, yes.
Okay. Will there be a Zoom presentation from staff to the scoring panel?
Let me see, Nathaniel, if you could maybe. It says from the organization.
No, there will not be. Your presentation to the scoring panel is your proposal. So you want to make sure that you are keying in on all of the elements of your proposal, all of the elements that we'll cover here. You'll want to make sure that you're keying into that, because the only opportunity you have to communicate with the scoring panel is through your written package submission. BSCC staff, the scoring panel, ESC members are not allowed to tell you how to submit your, to give you that level of detail on what you need to do to submit. We can only walk you through the technical processes so that make sure you understand what we're asking and requiring of you. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Any others in the chat, Danielle?
No, we can move on, and then if something pops up, I can, oh wait. Does funding from this grant make other funding opportunities through CDCR ineligible?
To my knowledge, I'm going to say no. I do know that every grant opportunity that is presented has its own eligibility factors. So there may be some grant projects that will say if you have certain funding, then you won't be eligible, but you would just have to look at whatever those are. There are, for our side of the house, right now, there are no conflicts that would prevent you from having this funding and funding from another element of CDCR.
One more question. Would the funding be yearly renewable, or is the total for a period of time?
It is a 3-year grant period.
Okay, and I think we can move on and we could answer the rest of the questions in the next, because there's
Absolutely.
nothing else is popping up.
Nothing popping up now. Great.
No.
Adriana, anything in the email box?
Nothing in email and
Any-
no hands raised.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. Then we will move on. We're going to start looking at the RFP. If you have a copy of your RFP in front of you, please feel free to follow along. For most of the presentation, you'll have the page numbers on the slide, so you'll know where we are at all times throughout the presentation. So we'll start with the letter of intent on page 2. Applicants that are interested in applying for the RFP or for the ARG warm handoff are asked, you are not required, but it is a request that you submit a notice of intent to apply. That notice of intent to apply should be emailed to us no later than January 8th, 2021. Please note that if you do submit a notice of intent to apply and decide later that you are not going to apply, there is no penalty for that. We don't decide that you can never apply for funding again. It is a non-binding letter of intent, and really it allows us to be able to determine our staffing. What do we need to be able to appropriately process all of the information that's coming in. So it allows us to better plan our side in terms of being able to manage the request. Additionally, if you are submitting your letter of intent, all you need to do is make sure that you include your name, address, and telephone number for your organization and whoever your primary contact would be, which should be like the executive director or something like that. And then make sure you're just letting us know that you do intend to apply for the ARG Warm Handoff Cohort 2 grant. And failure to submit, if you choose not to submit a letter of intent, it does not disqualify you from being able to apply. So again, I reiterate, it is a request, it is an optional thing for you. It is not binding in any way, shape, or form on the process itself. Your proposals, your completed proposal packages are due no later than February 5th, 2021. They must be received by 5 p.m. They must be signed with a digital or a wet signature and scanned via email to the ARG Warm Handoff at bscc.ca.gov. On the proposal submission, I do want to emphasize that definitely in the days of COVID, we do not have staff in the office regularly. So please do not mail in a submission. If you mail in your submission, you will not be scored. The only applications we are accepting must come via email. Okay, I cannot state that enough. They must come via email and they must be received by 5 p.m. Page 3, description of the grant. Generally speaking, this grant is designed specifically to support individuals who were formerly incarcerated in state prison. The grant period will run from July 1st, 2021 through February 28th, 2025. It will run for 3 years and about 7 months. Okay. Eligibility status. Eligibility is resigned for those who are, one moment please. Sorry. Eligibility is reserved for those who are community-based organizations only. You have to have a 501c3 status, and that status has to be verified through the California Secretary of State database. The website link for that is posted here. You can see that link here, and it is also in the RFP. There are a few places in the RFP where we talk about this, and it is an active link. So if you're in the digital version of the RFP, you can select that link and get right to the website. You can put in your verification, print that out, and have that ready to add with your application package. Okay. Additionally, for eligibility, community-based organizations that have not received $500,000 in ARG warm handoff funding are eligible to apply. Community-based organizations that received less than $500,000 in the previous round of funding are eligible to apply. So that means if you applied for maybe $200,000 in the first round and you received $200,000, but now you want to apply for the rest, the $300,000, you can apply for the $300,000. It is a separate process. You have to be awarded through this process, but you will not be able to apply for more than that so that you would have the maximum allowed of $500,000 between the two funding periods. And additionally, any CBOs that did receive $500,000 in the first round are not eligible to apply for this round of funding. The non-governmental organization requirements, nonprofit CBOs, you may partner with non-governmental organizations on this project. However, only one CBO can be the lead, and your NGOs must also meet the requirements that are noted on page 4 of your RFP. But I do want to highlight a few of those here. You want to make sure, if you do intend to partner with a non-governmental, make sure that you understand what those requirements are, because you will be responsible for ensuring that your partners adhere to those regulations and stipulations that are outlined by the BSCC. Non-governmental organizations include community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, nonprofit, other 501c3s, evaluators, with the exception of government institutions such as universities, grant management companies, and any other non-governmental agency or individual. If you are partnering with a NGO, you want to make sure that they have been duly organized and in good standing at least 6 months. You want to make sure that they are registered with the California Secretary of State's office, the email I just showed you, or the link, I'm sorry, that I just showed you. Make sure that they have a valid business license and make sure that they have a physical address. And remember, there are a few other components in your RFP on page 4 that you'll want to make sure that you're adhering to for that section as well. Page 5, the target population. The target population is reserved for those people who have been sentenced, incarcerated, and released from state prison. I want to emphasize the key here is that they had to have been incarcerated and released from a California state prison. This includes people who are leaving prison on parole, and it also includes those who are monitored by probation on PRCS or post-release community supervision. It does not include DJJ or the Department of Juvenile Justice, even though they are a CDCR subsidiary. They are, their transitional age youth who are released from DJJ do not qualify to be served with ARG funds. However, transitional age youth, or those who are 18 to 25 who have come out of a state prison, they are eligible. They just had to have state prison experience. County jail offenders, and I know AB 109 has created this situation where we have people, and that's your 1170 age category, where we have people who are being sentenced to prison but serving their time in county jail. Those folks do not qualify for these services, nor do individuals who have only served county jail time. They do not qualify for these services under ARG. So they have to have served time in a California state prison. Okay, housing first. I know we've had some questions on Housing First, so let's dig in. What is Housing First? Housing First is a homeless assistance approach that prioritizes providing permanent housing to people who are experiencing homelessness. The approach is guided by the belief that people need basic necessities like food and a place to live before they can attempt to even begin to deal with other life concerns like finding employment or even dealing with substance abuse issues. Housing First is based on the theory that client choice is valuable in housing selection and supportive service participation. And exercising that choice is likely to make a client more successful in remaining housed and improving their life. For Housing First, there are a few key components that we talk about in the RFP, and I've only highlighted a handful of them. But if you certainly read on pages 5 and 6, the details that make up Housing First and what we are anticipating or expecting with the ARG program are identified on pages 5 and 6. But if you are, and granted, this is not the rental assistance piece, but please know that if you are partnering with those organizations that are providing housing for your participants, you do want to make sure that as much as possible that you are partnering with people who are using a Housing First model. And some of the key things about that model is it cannot be contingent. Their housing status, whether they get housing or not, cannot be contingent upon whether or not they stay sober, whether or not they're participating in services, or their criminal history or abstinence from other substance use. There is a caveat there. So if they are in, I'm drawing a blank on the word I want to use, treatment housing. So if they're in like a sober living environment, things like that, there is legislation that allows those people or those entities to be able to have those particular rules in place. So there is a caveat to that. Supportive services that are utilized, they should emphasize engagement and problem solving over therapeutic goals. Case managers and service coordinators who are working in your project should be trained in and actively employ evidence-based practices. And we'll talk a little bit about evidence-based practices in a moment. And you want to make sure that your services are informed by a harm reduction philosophy. So those are some of the key components for Housing First that I want to make sure stay front of mind for you when you're designing your projects. If you need additional support, make sure that you take a look at Appendix F on page 33. We do have some additional information on Housing First and some other helpful resources that we hope you will be able to find useful as you are designing your projects. And then the last thing there is that, again, adult reentry grantees will be expected to implement a Housing First model as you are designing your program. So you want to make sure that you are supporting the tenets of the Housing First. Eligible activities. If you look at page 6 and 7 in your RFP, you'll see the list that's on the slide in front of you. And it's important to note that the eligible activities that are identified here are merely a suggestion. The legislation and the Executive Steering Committee did not narrowly decide that there were certain services or activities that would be allowed. They are giving the responsibility to the grantee to design programs and projects that fit the community that you're serving. These are examples of some of the services that are being provided, that have been provided, but we really are relying on you to survey your community and do your research to know what types of services are needed and what types of services will work for that target population. And again, that's really going to cover some of the evidence-based practice stuff, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. So make sure that as you're scheduling your activities, just keep in mind that those are the key things that we're expecting you to do, but there are no hard and fast rules. for what types of services you need to be providing in order to qualify to be awarded these funds. And just a reminder that the maximum allowed for the grant is $500,000. You may request up to $500,000 for the entire grant period. And make a note, and I think we'll say this again later, but there is no match required for this grant. All right. Any burning questions now? Let's go to Danielle in the chat.
We do have some questions. Some of them were asked before and we went over them, but I'm just going to run through them again. Okay. Somebody asked about the grant period being 3 years because in the RFP it mentions 43 months. So they just had a question clarifying which one it was.
Yeah, it's 3 years, 7 months. So you have time at the beginning to ramp up and time at the end to ramp down. So you should plan around 3 years for active direct service, and then 2-3 months on the back to ramp down, 2-3 months on the front to ramp up.
Somebody asked how many counties will be selected for this grant?
This is not a county grant. This grant is only allowed for community-based organizations. There will be no counties awarded funding under this grant project.
Do you expect this grant opportunity to open up again in the future? And if so, when?
We do expect it to open up again in the future. We do not know when. We do anticipate that it is going to be a recurring allocation in the budget. But however, as we all are experiencing with COVID-19 and the economic situation, we just won't know until the governor decides what the budget is and where funding is going to be awarded or allocated.
And then Nathaniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a question that says, can we submit before the RFP? And I believe that was in reference when we were speaking of the letter of intent.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So the question is, can you submit before the letter of intent?
No.
The letter of intent before the RFP.
Yes, you should submit your letter of intent if you know you're going to apply and you want to honor that request of ours. You should submit your letter of intent before January 5th. Oh, did I say that day right? I don't think so. Thank you. The letter of intent is due January 8th, and then the RFP is due February 5th.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Should the letter of intent explain anything about the proposal that we intend to submit? Do you just want to know that an organization plans to apply?
That's correct. You do not need to put anything in there about what your services are going to be or anything that's going to reference your proposal. It's just our opportunity to know how many people are intending to submit.
Is there a length limit to the RFP?
Say that again.
Is there a length limit to the RFP?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And we are going to cover that in detail in a few minutes. But the short answer is your narrative section for the RFP cannot exceed 9 pages. But we will go into the specifics of what that'll look like in a few moments.
Can an NGO subcontractor whose lead contractor was funded in round 1 at the $500,000 apply as a lead organization in round 2?
I think I need you to ask that again.
Can an NGO subcontractor whose lead contractor was funded in round 1, and I believe they received the $500,000 is what they're referring to, apply as a lead organization in round 2? Okay.
I think I'm understanding. Let me first make sure I'm understanding the question. So as a subcontractor, you subcontracted with a grantee that was awarded the full amount of funding in round 1. And now you want to apply as a lead organization for the full $500,000 on your own.
That's correct.
I think
that's correct.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. I am going to say I believe that is possible, but I do want to defer that question to our legal counsel to make sure that we don't have any conflicts with that or anything of that nature.
Thank you.
Aaron? Maybe he stepped away. Okay, maybe he stepped away. So what we'll do is we will take that question and you'll see that response in our FAQ. All of the questions that are being asked here today will be posted in a FAQ list that will go onto our website in a few days after this conference. And as questions are coming into our email box, we will be updating that FAQ list. So that particular question, I think I actually had it again in the mailbox as well last week. So we will be getting an answer to that and we'll just post it on our FAQ list. So stand by for that answer.
Okay. Are 501 nonprofit workforce development boards considered community-based organizations for purposes of a qualifying entity for this grant opportunity?
Say that one more time. Or is a workforce development nonprofit board?
A nonprofit workforce development board. Are they considered community-based organizations that would be a qualifying entity for this grant opportunity?
Okay, that's another one I'm going to ask our legal counsel to take, but I do think he might have stepped away. So I will take that question and I will post that answer as well. And I may need you to give me a little bit more information. Can you make sure you get that name and organization, so if I need to do some follow-up, I can actually reach out to them?
Sure. Let me write that down.
Thank you.
Okay. Can a county office of education apply?
County office would be no. The County Office of Education is a government agency, and this grant is reserved for community-based organizations.
Will a cohort 2 for rental assistance be released in the future?
If we release more rental assistance, it will be a new cohort, but we do hope to be able to release additional rental assistance projects as well. If you're referring to the additional money, the rental assistance money that was awarded or allocated with this grant, as I mentioned earlier, the $17,575,000 for rental assistance. Our rental assistance cohort 2 was awarded already back in August via a separate process.
Okay, where did that go? Okay. How about people who did state time, but they actually did the state time in a county jail facility?
Right, those would be your 1170s, and that will not be eligible. They will not be eligible. They had to have physically spent time in a California state prison.
This is just a repeat of the earlier questions because they came in late, asking if the slides are available after this conference.
Yes, the PowerPoint and the video recording will be available probably by early next week.
It says, do we need to address the recency of incarceration in a state facility, or is it enough to state the number of clients that ever were incarcerated at state?
Is it enough to state the number of clients? I'm not, ask that one more time.
Yeah, I believe that's, this was asked by Shane, if you may want to step in and ask or clarify this question, but it says, is it enough just to state the number of people that were actually incarcerated? But I see Shane came off mute if you want to explain.
Shane, can you ask your question? Give me a little more information.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry for not being more clear. I know that this is focused specifically on people that have been released from state facilities. Is there anything in the program that needs to address their recency upon release? Or, you know, some of the clients that we serve may have been released 6 months, a year, all the way up to, you know, returning after 10 years.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. No, there is nothing in the criteria that requires you to address the recency of their release. No, they have to have some history of prison incarceration, but the grant is not specific that it had to be like within 1 year or 3 years or anything like that.
And I believe this question is referring to Housing First It says, what if clients are required to maintain sobriety as condition of parole?
Yes, that would be one of those exceptions. I mentioned there's a caveat to that rule. So that would be an exception where that would be appropriate.
It says the checklist shows that 11 and 12 are required items, but the grant also says that if you do not collaborate with these entities, that it is not required, which is true.
And they're both true. So what that means is they are required documents. However, and I'm pulling up my checklist now, excuse me for turning my back. They are required documents. However, if you do not plan, and 11 is the, if you are partnering with a government agency, so if you're going to be partnering with probation or parole or something like that, you would need to have them submit a letter. And we are going to go into this in detail when we get to the submittal instructions. But 12, which is the Assurance of Government Organizations Agreement, if you are not doing that, there is a section on there where you check the box that says we are not partnering with any governmental organizations, and that completes your requirement for that.
Can the board resolution be the same item as the evidence of signing authority, or do you need two different documents?
No, they can be the same as long as it is clear that the board resolution or the evidence is clearly identifying who has signing authority.
If this grant does not apply to youth in the DJJ, are there other grant opportunities through the BSCC that we could focus on?
Absolutely. If you go out on our website, and I apologize because I couldn't tell you exactly how to get there right now, but we do have some opportunities for you to sign up on our listserv. If you send me an email to the Warm Handoff email box, I can certainly email you the link so that you can join our listserv. I can also tell you that we do have the YRG, the Youth Reinvestment Grant, which does deal specifically with youth. So certainly, if you'll send me that, I'll get you the I will get you the link for you to be able to join the listserv.
Because of the emphasis on housing first, does this mean that linkage to housing resources is required or essential to a successful proposal?
Say that one more time, please.
Because of the emphasis on housing first, does this mean that linkage to housing resources is required or essential to a successful proposal?
It is definitely an essential component.
Are the county offices of education eligible to apply? I think this we just covered.
Yes. No, a county office is not eligible to apply.
Is this being recorded and posted on the website? So we covered that.
Yes, or so.
So this is a follow-up for the housing first question that was asked previously. It says, how do we emphasize a housing first philosophy when addressing reentry services rather than housing in our proposal?
That is not something that I would be qualified to give you direction on. I can only provide you with some technical assistance with regards to what we are asking for. It's totally up to you to decide the best way to communicate your ideas to the scoring panel through your written proposal. But you definitely, probably the best advice I could give you there is to make sure that you have read the proposal, the RFP, thoroughly multiple times. Make sure you understand all of those components. Utilize the additional resources for Housing First and compare it to what it is that you are presenting, the program that you're structuring, and just make sure that also when you're looking at what we're asking you to submit when we get to the specific application points, make sure that you have done your comparisons and that you're answering those questions fully.
Are we able to make referrals as part of our linkage to resources to CBOs who were funded in round one?
Yes, that would be acceptable. We actually encourage the partnering with other ARG projects. Everybody can only do so much, and the more that we can encourage those linkages and collaboration, the better we're able to serve our state and our communities.
Is a community college an eligible entity?
No, it would not be.
Can services be started pre-release?
Yes, there is an opportunity for you to start reach-in services and to be able to utilize ARG funds to support those activities.
And I believe this is in reference to the RFP, but correct me if I'm wrong. It says, is there a template available for the workplace?
Yep, I'm not sure I'm understanding that question. For the workplace?
This is from MTC Development, if you could chime in. It says work plan. Okay, they updated it, said,
okay.
So is there a template available for the work plan?
Yes, we will cover that when we get into the specifics of the application process, but yes, the template is in the RFP, and if I remember correctly, the instructions in that page ask you to copy and paste into another document and then use that to submit your work plan.
Are 501 organizations that serve as fiscal agents eligible if they work with a public agency and the public agency provides program deliverables?
Say that one more time.
If a 501 organization that serves as fiscal agent eligible if they work with a public agency and the public agency provides program deliverables?
Okay, that question, I've actually seen a question similar as well, and we are researching that one, and that's one that will be coming up on the FAQ list. I do believe I'm going to need to request a little bit more detail on the specific organization. So if whomever's asking that question would resubmit that to the email box, we can do a little more homework and make sure we get you a correct response, and we'll post it on our FAQ page as well.
Do we collect and include the letters of commitment in our submission packet, or do those partners submit the letters independently?
Those would be collected and submitted with your packet.
I think that concludes the questions for this section.
Okay. Anything, Adriana?
Nothing in email, and I do not see any hands raised in from our participants.
Beautiful. Okay, let's talk for a minute about evidence-based practices. This component or this portion is going to be critical as you are planning your what your program implementation is going to look like. Evidence-based practices are just that. They are practices that are based on the evidence, the research, and the data collected from controlled studies. The use of evidence-based and promising practices is encouraged within the service delivery structure, and we want you to use it to support and demonstrate effective outcomes. So when we talk about evidence-based practices, we are really talking about approaches to working with justice-involved individuals that have been demonstrated in research as being effective in reducing recidivism. As such, you should take care to ensure that the services and practices that you employ are evidence-based and are appropriate for the target population. Make sure you do your research so that you can identify clearly the evidence that you are using to show that the practices that you are proposing are in fact effective for your target population. And make sure that you are clearly connecting your evidence to the practice to demonstrate its effectiveness as well. These three principles should serve to guide you in your use of the research and data-driven decision-making in the development, implementation, and evaluation of your grant projects. The BSCC point of view for evidence-based practices, if you're looking in your RFP, you'll see that we list out three main questions that are critical as you are drafting your responses and creating your programs. On a basic level, we want you to consider these 3 questions. Number 1, is there evidence that the intervention is likely to work? Is there documentation of positive results? Is there published research? What is the evidence that supports the intervention that you're suggesting? 2, can you demonstrate that that intervention is being carried out as intended? Is there a way for you to monitor for fidelity? If you have this great program and you can prove that it's effective through the research, but you're only implementing certain portions of it, then you lose the effectiveness. So it's really important that not only that you have the evidence, but you also have to be able to demonstrate that your delivery of that intervention is in line with the design of the intervention that you are implementing. And then the third thing you want to make sure that you are aware of is whether or not you have a plan or a process to collect and analyze the data for later evaluation. Things like post and pre-test or pre and post-test and things like that. How are you collecting information? Do you have a plan for that? Do you have a way to analyze that data to make sure that you know where people started and where people ended so that you can demonstrate to us at the end of your project that you actually had an effective project, you achieved the outcomes that you had set out to achieve and have been able to help ease the homeless population and help support the reentry of those folks returning from state prison. All right, your RFP overview continues. So on page 8 and 9, we'll get into some of the more administrative components of the RFP process. Once you're approved for funding by the BSCC, you'll be required to enter into a grant agreement with the BSCC. Grantees must agree to comply with the terms and conditions of the grant agreement. If you want to take a peek at the sample grant agreement that is included in the RFP, it is Appendix G on page 36. Please note that it is a sample that's included in the RFP appendix. It is not a final, so the terms and conditions and other little nuances in there may change prior to an actual execution of that contract. The grant agreement start date is expected to be July 1, 2021, which is the date that the grant is projected to begin. And contracts are considered fully executed only after they are signed by both the grantee and the BSCC. The governing board resolution, as we recently discussed, applicants are required to submit a governing board resolution that basically stipulates the person signing the application for the project is authorized on behalf of the organization to do so. You must submit that in your proposal package, and we need to make sure that whoever is signing that your governing board resolution not only grants them authority to sign the application, but also grants them fiscal authority as well, that they can sign for monies and things like that as well. So all of those things are pertinent in your governing board resolution. Supplanting, remember there is no match requirement for this grant, but funds shall be used to support new program activities or to augment existing funds that expand current program activities. BSCC grant funds shall not be used to replace existing funds. Supplanting is strictly prohibited for all BSCC grants. So please be careful not to take funds that are already delegated and then replace them with BSCC funds if you are awarded for this grant. With regards to the audit, there is an audit requirement now for the BSCC grants. That requirement is for the entire grant period, which is July 1, 2021 to February 28, 2025. The audit report at the conclusion of your grant term will be due to the BSCC on August 31st, 2025. And you are allowed to claim up to $25,000 of your grant fund to cover actual costs for the audit. So there is a section in the budget that will allow you to budget that in. So when we do call for that audit, you'll be able to have the funds available to pay for it. And I need to add too that the audit shall be performed by a CPA. Funding disbursement. Special arrangements have been made to accommodate the needs of CBOs in this grant, and we have adopted the advanced payment model, which means that once approved and your contract is signed and executed, you will receive the first third of your award within the first 75 days following execution of your grant agreement. Subsequent disbursements will be in thirds, and in order to apply for your next disbursement, you will have to have completed your invoicing for that period. You have to have all of your invoices submitted and approved by BSCC staff, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you have spent at least 80% of the previous disbursement before your next disbursement will be approved. At the end of the grant, any unspent funds must be returned to the BSCC. When you do receive your first disbursement, you do need to deposit that money into a bank account, and those funds are not to be commingled with other funds for your organization. Project interest, any interest that is earned on the funds that you deposit into the bank account must be reported as project interest. There's a space in our invoicing where you would document that, and that project interest income must be claimed as income and can only be used for allowable expenses during the grant period. Okay, invoicing. Grantees shall only use grant funds for allowable costs and shall provide invoices and supporting documentation to the BSCC quarterly. And I want to pause, and I know we're going to talk about the budget in a moment too, but I just like to indicate that when you're invoicing, the budget that you present in your proposal whatever you're putting in your invoice should match what you've proposed. If you have changes, you need to make sure that you are communicating with the BSCC in advance. So as you're drafting your budget, which we will talk about, make sure that you're thinking about all of those things. Make sure that you're identifying those things that are going to be critical to allow you to be able to invoice appropriately. So as you're thinking about these things, as you're preparing your application, you want to be thinking about how all of these details are going to come together for you and your organization. Progress reports are a critical element in BSCC's monitoring and oversight process. Grantees that are unable to demonstrate that they are making sufficient progress toward project goals and objectives, or that they're spending down funds appropriately, could be subject to withholding of funds. It is very important that you are letting us know how you are progressing in your project. Are you able to spend down the funds and what's going on, so that we can make sure that you will be achieving the outcomes that you are proposing. We will have a mandatory grantee orientation. That date will be determined at a later time. We are projecting right now that the grantee orientation will be in August, but that may change depending on how the contracting process goes. The purpose of the mandatory session is to review the program requirements, invoicing and budget modification process, data collection, reporting requirements, all of the things that make up your grant process with us are the things that we go into detail about during your grantee orientation. So all of these things like invoicing and progress reports and budgets, all of those things, once granted an award will be discussed in far more detail at a later date. Travel. The CBOs that are receiving BSCC funds, they must use the state travel and per diem policy unless the grantee's written travel policy is more restrictive than the state's, in which case your policy must be used. So if your policy is more restrictive than the state travel and per diem policy, you should use your organization's travel policy to reimburse for your organization's travel expenses. And while during the COVID season, we certainly will not be doing too many in-person trainings or meetings, we do still ask that you plan for at least 2 trips to Sacramento during your grant period, assuming we will return to some level of normalcy in travel somewhere in the next 6 to 12 months. And we're able to do some more in-person things. We do want to make sure that you have money budgeted to allow for travel. When you think about who should travel to BSCC events, you want to be able to plan for your project director, your fiscal contact, your financial officer, and your program contact. Those are your 4 key people for this grant project. So you do want to make sure that you're able to keep them involved. The BSCC grant guide will provide a lot more detail and information as you are wanting to better understand what our travel policies are. Out-of-state travel is restricted, very, very much so, and is only allowed in exceptional situations, and you must receive prior written approval before incurring any expenses for out-of-state travel. Even if it has been authorized in the grant award, grantees must submit a separate formal request on their letterhead for approval. And any out-of-state travel request must include a detailed justification and the budget information. Debarment. It is the policy of the BSCC to protect grant funds from unreasonable risks of fraudulent, criminal, or other improper use. As such, the board will not enter into contracts or provide reimbursement to applicants that have been debarred by any federal, state, or local government entities during the period of debarment, or that have been convicted of fraud, theft, or embezzlement of federal, state, or local government grant funds for a period of 3 years following conviction. A copy of that form is located in Appendix H on page 37 of your grant, of your RFP. Furthermore, the BSCC does require grant recipients to provide an assurance that there has been no applicable debarment, disqualification, suspension, or removal, and that is the form that I am referencing right now. So make sure that you review that form, complete that form, sign that form, and include it in your RFP application packet. When you get to that form, there are 3 little boxes. You need to make sure that you've read and checked each one of those in order for that page to be completed and signed properly. Oh, and the BSCC does require that all grant recipients include as a condition of award to a subgrantee or subcontractor a requirement that the subcontractor or the subgrantee will provide the same assurances to the grant recipient. So again, as an awardee, if you are contracting with an NGO or something else, you are responsible to ensure that anyone that you're contracting with meets the same level of qualification as you had to meet for BSCC funds. So you want to make sure that you are clear on what those responsibilities are. Site visits. Traditionally, during the term of the grant, the BSCC will conduct site visits for compliance monitoring. However, As we know, COVID-19 is real. So we will at least start conducting them virtually for the time being. You can see a sample of the compliance monitoring visit checklist. That's in Appendix I, pages 38 through 46 in your grant agreement. The most important thing to just note there is, we do have requirements to make sure that your organization is responsibly using the grant funds, and that's what those site visits are for. We come out, we learn your program, we get to see you in action. Hopefully we get the opportunity to interact with and communicate with some of your participants and some of your staff. And we also have our audit team that will be involved, or staff from our audit department will be involved. And we will also be doing some more detailed reviews of the fiscal responsibilities as well. Upon submission of a proposal, applicants will receive a confirmation email from the BSCC that will indicate that we have received your proposal. The email is going to be sent to the person who is listed as the project director. Please be sure that you have reviewed this disqualification list to make sure that you have prepared a complete submission package. A couple of things that I'll highlight here, and yes, this list is in your RFP. A couple of things I'll highlight again. One, that the submission must be electronic. A hard copy will not be accepted. It must be received by 5 p.m. on February 5th, 2021. You will be disqualified if you are not a community-based organization located in the state of California with a 501c3 status. Your proposal narrative must meet the formatting requirements. 12-point Arial font, 1-inch margins on all 4 sides, and 1.5 line spacing. Your narrative cannot exceed 9 pages in length. Your budget attachment must be complete, and we are going to go into some detail about the budget attachment in a little bit. It must be complete, and you must have all your tables completed. You also want to make sure that whatever amount you have in your budget matches what you've requested throughout your proposal. If those don't match, that can definitely be some grounds for disqualification. If your budget attachment is more than 4 pages, that can be grounds for disqualification. The proposal package, that checklist that is on page 17 in your RFP, I'm not going to go through all of those, but we'll be hitting them as we finish up the presentation today. But if your proposal package is not complete, that will be grounds for disqualification. If your funding request is more than $500,000, that will be grounds for disqualification. And again, to be disqualified means that your proposal will not move forward to the scoring panel for the scoring and rating process and will not be considered for funding. Once the proposals are received, they will be assigned to the scoring panel for rating and scoring. And our research specialist is going to talk to you about those scoring and rating factors in just a few minutes. After proposals are scored, the panel will create the list for funding recommendations, and that list will go to the board on June 10th. And then once the funding recommendations are approved, then we will provide notification to the awardees. So a quick summary of key dates that is also in your RFP. Bidders Conference is today. Letter of intent is due again January 8th, 2021. And remember, that is a non-binding statement that you intend to apply. Proposals are due February 5th, 2021 by 5 p.m. The proposal rating process will then ensue between February and May. The board will consider funding recommendations June 10th. Notice to grantees will go out ideally around June 5th, right after the board agrees or approves of the funding list that the scoring panel recommends. And then the contracts are set to begin July 1st. And again, that mandatory grantee orientation is tentatively scheduled for August of 2021. Any questions?
So we have a question. This was when we were discussing the evidence-based practices. Are you encouraging external evaluators?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We're not encouraging. We're encouraging you to utilize your resources in a way that allows you to gather the best information and data, and to also be able to demonstrate that you've been effective. But we aren't here to tell you what you should or should not do to create your program to be the most effective. What we're doing is sharing with you what we've discovered that works in terms of the evidence-based practices. And again, it becomes your responsibility to determine the best way that that works for your organization and the program that you are designing.
Can we report unpublished past program accomplishments as evidence of program effectiveness?
Say that one more time.
Can we report unpublished past program accomplishments as evidence of program effectiveness?
I don't want to answer that one incorrectly. So yeah, I don't want to answer that one incorrectly. If you don't mind, let me take that question and post that answer on the FAQ list. I want to say I don't think that has that much of an impact, but I don't want to answer that one incorrectly. So let me take that question and I will post that in the FAQs.
And then this is going on those 3 questions that we were discussing with the evidence-based practices. Should the answers to these questions be in any specific section of the project narrative?
No, those are just things for you to be considering as you're designing your project. So it doesn't have to be explicit in terms of how you're answering those questions, but we put that out there for you to, one, of course, make sure that you're aware of evidence-based practices and principles of effective intervention, and to also just remind you that as you are designing your project, that these are some things that you want to keep in mind. There'll be some more critical points when Ashley is going through the actual rating factors and scoring that you'll want to make sure that you are being more specific to answer in your proposal packet.
And then I believe that this next question was referring to when we were discussing audit reports, so the RFP, and it's kind of vague. So Rochelle, you might need to jump in. It says $25,000 can be used for what? And I'm not really 100% sure on what that was referencing.
$25,000 can be used for actual costs for the audit. So to pay for your CPA or anything that has to be involved with preparing your audit report that will be due to the BSCC in August of 2025.
Is the audit for this grant only, is the audit for this grant only or for the entire organization?
It's for this grant, I think.
Does the auditor need to be external to the organization?
The auditor needs to be a CPA.
And this is asking about travel. Are there to be required meetings of the grantees?
Ask that again.
I believe they're asking if there are going to be required meetings for the grantees in reference to travel.
There are, like the grantee orientation is a required meeting for grantees. Whether or not we're traveling for it is dependent upon our public health measures. And that's why I was suggesting that you still budget for it, even though we don't know if we'll actually have to use it right away. And once the public health measures have eased, we may end up doing something later in the grant period that would require you to travel.
Transportation for clients, would this be support services or included in travel?
Anything for clients should be in your supportive services, and we'll hit that when we talk about the budget in detail.
And then this is back to referencing for the meetings in Sacramento. How many days would we be in Sacramento?
It would really just depend on what that particular meeting or event is. Typically, it's 1 day.
Okay, so this says that they might have missed the answer, but here, let me read the whole thing. I may have missed this answer. Eligible participants include any person formally sentenced to and released from state prison, regardless of when release occurred. Here's the question. This includes people leaving state prison and on parole or monitored by probation department through county post-release community supervision. Does this include people not leaving these or if they were released long ago? I might need some clarification with this question.
Let me take a shot. I think I understand your question, and the answer is we have not specified any specific time criteria for prison release experience. So we have not specified if their prison release has to have been from last month or 2 years ago. That has not been a stipulation. The stipulation is that the participants who are receiving services under ARG must have been released from prison at some point in their history.
Do you have guidance on how organizations should plan their budget in light of COVID as program capabilities change? Some costs are higher while some are lower. And will there be an opportunity to amend the allocation of the budget as COVID landscape changes?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And as we've been working with cohort 1, we've been seeing that a lot. And again, when we get to the budget section, we'll certainly talk about this in more detail, but absolutely, we do understand that when you prepare your budget, you are preparing your best guess for what you are looking at before you. We do have processes built in that will allow you to amend your budget if you need to do so. So yes, we will be able to accommodate that if you need to. The caveat to that is plan your budget and make sure your budget lines up with the services you are proposing to provide. You want to be careful when we get into budget modifications that as you have to modify your budget, and we do understand the COVID landscape, but we want to be careful that as you have to modify your budget, that you don't make so many modifications that your program or your project becomes unrecognizable from what you initially proposed to do, because then that creates a different concern in terms of how you were scored and how you were awarded the money. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about that as you're preparing your project scope and your budget, anticipating what some of these changes are going to be in the COVID landscape.
Is there a definition of CBO?
The definition that we are using is a community-based organization with a 501c3 status.
Is the $25,000 audit line item to be an annual cost?
No, it's a one-time expense. The audit is only required once at the conclusion of the grant period.
That concludes all the questions in the chat.
Okay, Adriana?
Okay, my turn. I did get an email from Sarah Hiller, and we have a couple questions.
Okay.
What does reporting look like for this grant if funded?
Reporting?
Yes, reporting. What does reporting look like for this grant if funded? Quarterly, question mark. Are there templates, reports, etc.?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes, we will require quarterly progress reports. And yes, we do have a template that you will use to complete your progress reports.
Okay. The next one is, should the list of partners referenced in the RFP be included in the project narrative or attached a separate document?
The list of partners, so like the NGOs or any collaborators, those would be included in your package information. for sure, you're certainly free to, whatever information you think is going to be helpful for the scoring panel to read, rate, and score your proposal, that's what you want to put in your actual narrative. But yes, we do have space. We do have some attachments that you will be required to complete that will identify who your partners are, whether they are governmental entities or non-governmental entities. So you'll have 2 documents where you can identify those as attachments.
Next question is, do references count against the 9-page limit for the project narrative?
References or the letters of support, they do not.
Okay. Should the project narrative be responsive to changes in reentry due to COVID-19 and account for the possibility of some continued social distancing, remote service delivery?
The project narrative should address the components that are going to be highlighted in the scoring factors that we're going to talk about. Ashley is going to actually talk about those after this round of questions. And those are the things that should guide your proposal. You want to make sure that you are definitely adhering to what those factors are, what the ESC has decided was critical in how you need to demonstrate what your plan is going to be. That's what you want to focus on. And you also want to make sure that as you are presenting your request, that you are taking into consideration all of the things that are going to be necessary in order for you to complete your project as planned. If that means you need to consider COVID landscape, then you need to be able to talk about COVID landscape. If you need to consider some other things that might show up, then you want to make sure you include all of those pieces. The most important thing I can emphasize is make sure that you're paying attention to how those bullet points line out in that part that Ashley's getting ready to cover for us.
Okay. Can we simply refer readers to the work plan in section 2.1 of the project narrative, or should we summarize it?
Ask that one more time. I'm not sure I'm following.
Can we simply refer readers to the work plan in section 2.1 of the project narrative, or should we summarize it?
Should we refer readers to the work plan?
In section 2.1?
Again, I can't tell you how to write your proposal. I can tell you that you would want to follow the instructions that are listed in the RFP.
Okay. Last one from Sarah is, what is required in terms of evaluation, data collection within the project narrative, and what section should it be included in?
Say that one more time.
What is required in terms of evaluation / data collection within the project narrative, and what section should it be included in?
That information will be discussed. Ashley's going to cover some of those points next, and where it belongs will be laid out in those sections. I think we have 4 sections in there that talk about what needs to go for your narrative and what's important for each section. So all of that will be laid out in there.
And that was it from Sarah.
Awesome.
No hand raising, and that was the only email.
Okay, sounds good. Then I will turn you over to the very capable hands of our research data specialist, Ashley Garibaldi. Ashley?
Remember to unmute myself this time. Thank you, Tanya. Hopefully you can take a break for a second. My name is Ashley. I am assigned to this grant, and we will be discussing the proposal evaluation system components of the ARG Warm Handoff Reentry Grants, RFP. The information documented here will be for you as applicants to respond to through your proposals. We will refer to what we ask applicants to provide and how it will be used as the proposal evaluation system. The importance of today is to review what you're expected as the applicant to respond to. Everything needs to be clearly articulated in the application. In creating the proposal evaluation system, our ESC members were instructed to make decisions and include content to ensure fair and valid evaluation process. It should be clear to applicants how the proposal will be evaluated with this content. So on this slide, this is part of our proposal evaluation system. This table will be used for the ESC. This is shown to give you all context as to how the components of the evaluation system work together and are used to calculate proposal scores. These components were determined by the ESC. These include the rating factors right here, 1 through 4, program need, program description, organizational capacity and coordination, and 4 budget section. The weights referred to in this case is percentage of total value in this table that add up to 100%, and the total possible score for a proposal and minimum scoring thresholds. Raters will score an applicant's response in each of these rating factors on a scale of 0 to 5, which you'll see in the next slide. The points allocated to each rating factor are weighted according to the percent of total value and the rated rating factor score as seen on the previous slide. The weighted rating factor score are summed to calculate the overall score for each proposal. The maximum score is 150 points. For this grant, there is a minimum scoring threshold that an applicant must achieve to be considered for funding. That is 50% or a minimum score of 75 total points. Once each applicant's proposal score is determined, a ranked list is created for funding purposes. Awards are given out by going down the ranked list until funding is exhausted and or the threshold is no longer met. So we'll go into detail on each of the components next. Can you switch slides for me, please, Tanya? Thank you. In the previous slide, a point range of 0 to 5 was shown. This is connected with the rating scale used to evaluate the applications received. To give you an idea of what the rating scale will look like, this is our standard scale that is used across all grants and the proposal evaluation systems. The ESC will use this standard rating scale to evaluate a proposal's response in each factor. As you see, there are 6 points from 0 to 5 here. Ranging from 0 or not responsive, where the response fails to address the criteria, all the way to excellent or 5 points, where the response addresses the criteria in an outstanding way. Beneath each point value and its label is the description provided to help further define each scale point. And then each of these anchors include key terms that are in bold font to further distinguish the scale points from one another. Raters will translate their evaluations of the strengths and weaknesses of your applications and 2 rating factors onto a point value using this scale. So the points allocated to each rating factor are weighted according to the percent of total value, which we saw in the previous slide, to arrive at the weighted rating factor score. Those are summed, of course, to get to the maximum possible points of 150. Next slide, please. Oops, one more. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's fine. Sorry. Okay, so proposal instructions starts with on page 16 with the cover sheet. We ask you to complete this with the name of the applicant and date of submission. Proposal checklist is found on page 17, which we ask to complete and include with the RFP package. It must be signed in blue ink by the authorized individual. And the applicant information form, starting on page 19 through 20, needs to be completed with information in each section, which also must be signed in blue ink by the authorized individual. The narrative sections included, which we've touched on previously, address each of these 3 required sections below: project need, project description, and organizational capacity and coordination. In these narrative sections, each section must be titled according to its section header as provided. Within each section, address the information requested in the rating factors in a cohesive, comprehensive narrative format. Do not include website links. Do include the number of pages, and then, or excuse me, number the pages, and the narrative for each proposal cannot exceed 9 pages in length. So the entire narrative of Unless otherwise noted, each narrative section must be formatted in Arial 12-point font with 1.5 line spacing, 1-inch margins on all 4 sides, and again, a 9-page limit for the narrative section. The proposal budget, which is the 4th rating factor and also an important component to your application, we ask you to address the budget by completing the amended budget table, and that includes a budget narrative. The amended budget table is accessed through a link to an Excel document contained in the amended RFP on page 24. The budget section does not count toward the 9 pages of narrative section. When you open it up, and Tanya will talk about this more later, you'll see that there's line items and then an area for you to further explain in detail what you are costing out. So now we're going to talk about rating factors, which start on page 22 through 24. The ESC will evaluate the merits of each of the proposals received in terms of how well each applicant responds to the rating factors found in each of the sections listed below. Again, the 6-point rubric, as seen previously, is listed here for reference and will be used to evaluate your responses to the rating factors and criteria. And we encourage you to read through these. I'm going to go through them, but these were all created by the ESC, and the scoring committee will use these. Basically, these are the questions that you are responding to. As you'll see up here, the title of the project need is the first rating factor for section 1, and the percent of total value attributed to that is 30%. They all, going back, let me see. So program need was 30%, program description was 40%, organizational capacity and coordination is 20%, and budget section is 10%. You have 9 pages to address the first 3 rating factors, and of course the budget section is not included within those 9 pages, but we provide only the instruction is that you respond to these, and it is up to you to decide how to use your space according to what you'd like to respond to. We do guide you in that the percent of total value is higher for some than others, so take that and use that to decide how you'd like to use your space in your responses. So with that, we will go through the rating factors by each section and then their associated criteria. So rating factor 1 is project need. First criteria is 1.1, where we ask you for the description of the community's needs to be addressed by the Warm Handoff Reentry Services Program. 1.2, describe the target population to be served for the Warm Handoff Reentry Services Program, including relationship of the identified target population to the purpose of the Warm Handoff Reentry Services Program, and needs of the identified target population. 1.3, service gaps that contribute to the need for Warm Handoff Reentry Services programs are identified. And then 1.4, relevant local qualitative and/or quantitative data in support of the Warm Handoff Reentry Services Program need are provided. Okay. 2.1, this is associated with rating factor of program description with a percent of total value of 40%. You see right here. 2.1, please provide a description of the proposed program goals, objectives, and impact that includes the relationship to the need and the intent of the Warm Handoff Reentry Services Program. A work plan, attachment A of the Warm Handoff Reentry Services proposal, is completed identifying the top 3 goals and objectives and how these will be achieved in terms of the activities, responsible staff partners, and start and end dates. And as it was asked earlier, there is a template within the application for you to fill out. 2.2, description of the service types, sources, and method of delivery that will be made available to participants in the proposed Warm Handoff Reentry Services Program, including the plan for selecting the types and kinds of services to be provided to each participant, e.g. assessments, the projected number of participants to be served, how the services will be delivered, including length and duration, the role, responsibilities, and activities of the case managers, system navigators, and/or other staff delivering services. And then a list of any outside agencies and the services they will provide and or link to has been submitted. Proposed interventions and resources to be made available to participants are outlined. If providing housing-based services or linking to housing-based services, describe the extent to which the program supports the core components of Housing First. So that gets to one of your questions about where to put those partners. 2.3, we'd like the rationale for the proposed warm handoff reentry services program that includes the selection of evidence-based, promising, informed, or innovative practices, interventions, and services, and a description of the relevant evidence or research to support the selection of the proposed program for the target population and community. Moving on, so this is rating factor 3, and you'll see it's called organizational capacity and coordination again. The ESC attributed a percent of total value of 20% of the overall total. 3.1, description of applicants' experience administering warm handoff reentry services to the target population, including the applicant's current capacity to serve participants and provide access to treatment and case management, how the proposed project, if funded, will increase capacity to serve clients, and then a description of readiness to proceed if funded. 3.2, description of the plan for selecting, recruiting, and referring participants for the warm handoff reentry services program. Agreements with partnering or referring organizations that will help ensure the projected number of participants are served are included. Continuing on with rating factor 3.3, description of the timeline for the execution of contracts and the implementation of services such that they are in place in a reasonable time frame to support the project. 3.4, description of outreach and community engagement efforts for the warm handoff reentry services to include efforts to include or hire people with lived experience into the administration or service delivery of the program, and the extent to which the program promotes collaboration with other organizations. And this is rating factor 4, project budget, which the ESC attributed 10% of the total value to. So 4.1, provide a complete and detailed budget information in each section of the warm handoff reentry services budget attachment, and the link is below, that includes language supporting each expense and expenses that are appropriate to the project's goals and planned activities. Does anyone have any questions about what I just presented?
So the first question says, are there performance metrics?
No, I'll leave that to Tanya, but I don't believe so, other than quarterly progress report data collected along the way.
As of now, there are none, but what I will do is make sure I'm not misunderstanding that question. Actually, let me ask you a little bit of clarifying information. What do you mean by performance metrics? Is the BSCC requiring you to meet certain outcome objectives? Is that the question you're asking?
Yes, Tanya, something like that. In terms of quarterly standards, for instance, if we were going to do an employment program to place a certain number or percentage of the clients involved in the program.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. No, we have not set that level of criteria. Again, we're trusting you as the professionals in your field to know what is logical, reasonable, what kind of outcomes you're projecting, and then your progress reports will support how you are meeting those objectives and outcomes.
Do reviewers have an obligation to review all materials submitted, or do they only review certain parts?
The scoring panel will review your project application to include the required documents. Everything that's on checklist, on that checklist on page 17, that's what the scoring panel will review.
Can letters of support be from government agencies?
If they are the government agencies that you are partnering with, absolutely. If you are simply including letters of support, that is certainly your option to do so. The scoring panel will receive information that is related to, will only receive the documents that relate to your proposal package. Again, those documents that are required per the checklist on page 17.
Is there a minimum number of clients served?
That again is going to be for you to determine what you believe is reasonable for your project.
Who will be on the panel?
We have not identified the scoring panel yet, but you can certainly follow that process. We'll be posting it on the BSCC website on the homepage when we get ready to recruit for the scoring panel. But remember, it will be a similar, it'll be a diverse group of people that have the subject matter expertise and things like that. And if I failed to mention it earlier, I know I talked about the ESC not being eligible, or their organizations not being eligible to compete in the first round. And it will be the same, the scoring panel that we identify, if their organizations or if they have any other conflicts, they will not be allowed to compete or have organizations that they represent compete while they're on the scoring panel. So that's how that will work.
Does life experience need to be exclusively state prison experience? And how about federal prison?
I am willing to indicate that becomes your organization's decision on how you want to address that factor.
And then they have the question, where in the narrative do we describe our evaluation and data gathering process and team?
Where in the narrative do you do what?
Do they describe their evaluation and data gathering process and team?
I want to say that was in section 3, Ashley, am I right? Organization capacity?
I believe so. I'm trying to pull it up real quick.
I thought you had talked about that, but I could be wrong.
Let me pull that up real quick. Yeah, so organizational capacity and coordination, description of experience administering, current capacity, let's see, your plan, agreements with, and then your efforts to outreach. I don't believe we actually ask for, I'm just reading this quickly again, about specific types of internal evaluation. Because we don't have a requirement for a local evaluation plan or report.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's correct.
So
that's correct. Thank you for making that point too.
Yeah, so I don't believe we ask them, you as applicants, to detail how you're going to be internally evaluating. If you find that that's useful information to answer one of the criteria, for example, evidence-based support for your program, that is up to you to decide.
Thank you, Ashley.
And then the last question says, as to targeted population, will experience with people formerly incarcerated in county jail count?
No, county jail does not count in and of itself. However, if the person has released from county jail, but they also have a history of some prior time of prison experience, then those people will be eligible to receive services under ARG.
And that's all the questions in the chat.
Any for you, Adriana?
Nothing here.
Awesome. Okay, the next component we're going to cover really quickly is the work plan. And this is really just to remind you that this is a required attachment, number one. And number two, as was mentioned earlier, if you look here at your instructions here, it does ask you when you go to build your project work plan, it does ask that you copy and paste the following tables into a separate document. It is critical that you do note that you need to only list your top 3 goals here, and you can utilize Appendix F for information related to developing goals and objectives. So if you go out to Appendix F, we have some stuff over there for that gives you some resources for evidence-based practices, as well as some housing first stuff and some other things that we think may be helpful as you are building out that project and looking at how to develop your goals and objectives for your project. The next piece we're going to talk about is the budget attachment. If you are using the electronic version, if you're using the electronic version of the RFP, this link here is active. I'm not going to click it now because you won't see it anymore, but once you select that link, sometimes it may require you to use your control key and then hit the link. But once you hit the link, you should get a box that pops up that asks you if you want to continue forward. You select yes, and then your budget attachment will open. Additionally, another thing to take note of, sometimes it'll open this way, sometimes it won't. But if you get the yellow banner on top of your budget attachment that says enable content, make sure you enable the content so that you are actually able to edit the document itself. Couple of things to keep in mind when you are preparing your proposed budget. Only apply for the amount of funds that you need to actually fund your program or run your program. You are eligible to apply for up to $5,000, but again, we do suggest that you only apply for the amount of funds that you need. Another reminder that there is no match required for this grant project. Funds must be requested in whole dollars only. We do understand that some of our CPA folks or those who work with the numbers like to be precise and specific, and we love that. However, when you are putting your information in your budget attachment, we do need you to use whole numbers. The Excel will not work with the cents. So make sure that you are putting your amounts in whole dollars only. Budget line item categories are limited to those contained in the budget attachment. And we're going to talk about each of those categories. There are 9. You cannot change them, adjust them, or add any new categories. You are limited to fit your activities into the 9 categories that have been predetermined. And then if no money is requested for a particular line item category, then make sure that budget table represents 0 and that you put an NA in the corresponding narrative. So, oh, this is a duplicate, my apologies. But again, this is just telling you how to access the hyperlink. Make sure you click the word link and it will take you to the budget attachment. When you open your budget attachment, the first thing you want to make sure that you do is enter your organization name here. And the other thing to point out to you is that this table will auto-populate based on the information entered in the sections. So you don't have to enter anything in this section when you're starting your budget. As you are entering your information in the following components of your budget, then it will automatically tabulate the totals for this portion of the budget. So the only thing you need to do up top is put in the name of your organization. As you start to use your budget tables, the first line item category is going to be salaries and benefits. This is the place where you want to begin identifying who's going to be working in the grant project, who's going to be funded with grant dollars. Are you using case managers? Are you using housing navigators? Whatever your folks are going to be, this is where you want to list those out. You'll identify the person or the title. As a caveat, you don't really need to put the people's names. You may not even know who they are yet. What's most important is that you identify the positions that are going to be funded, more so than the person, because we also understand that people change. And because we do such a rigorous review where we're looking at your proposed budget and your invoices, It just makes more sense for you to just identify those titles, and you don't have to put the names in there. But you'll identify what that position is, and then you'll identify the FTE or hourly rate and demonstrate that breakdown. Make sure that you are noting, you can either do the hourly, if they're hourly people, or full-time equivalent people. And then as you fill those in and populate those totals, this total will roll up to the top, which is that first section we just looked at. This is what the narrative section looks like after each line item category. As you describe what's happening in that line item category, you will also want to provide the narrative detail for what is happening in that category. So for example, with your salaries and benefits, for the different positions that you identify, you'll want to describe what those positions are for, what might they be doing, how are they impacting the goals and objectives of the project, things like that. That's the piece of information that becomes critical. Again, as we're doing your invoicing, we always go back to your proposed budget. So that information needs to be as detailed as possible, but also, and this is going to be double speak, but you want to be detailed, but yet somewhat general. And as a tidbit helper, if you are working in the salaries and benefits in the narrative, I'm sorry, in any of the narratives, if you're working in the narrative section and you need to do a return or to start a new paragraph, this is a little key trick I didn't even know existed, but you want to hold down your Alt key and press enter, and that'll let you start a new paragraph within that Excel table. The second line item category is services and supplies. This is where you're going to itemize all services and supplies to be purchased by the applicant only. So as the grantee, as you're designing your project, any of the services and supplies that you intend to utilize in the implementation of your project, whether it be like we have here, supportive services for bus passes, gas cards, etc. You want to put all of those things in this category here. You want to make sure you do your calculation for the expenditure, and then of course your totals. Anything that you are utilizing services and supplies for your partner agencies, those will be detailed in that budget section. So when we get to where we're talking about your professional services or your NGOs, that's where you will also put their services and supplies and things like that, that the grant will be funding. Professional services, this is where you will list the names of any of the public agencies that you're going to be partnering with that will be utilizing the grant dollars, or any professional consultants that will work on the project. So you will itemize that here. Make sure that you are letting us know what it is that you're, who it is, the consultant or the public agency or whatever is going here. Give us the calculation for the expenditure. So if, for example, you are using a consultant and you are paying them, whether they are salaried, FTE, hourly, just like you would do in salaries and benefits, you want to make sure that you do it here for your professional services for any staff that are being funded out of this section. Make sure you identify the amounts that are allocated to each line so that your totals tabulate over here. And then again, in your narrative, make sure that you are detailing how those items are useful and relevant to project outcomes. Let me go back for a second and talk about your narrative for services and supplies. As you are itemizing your features for the services and supplies line item, you do want to make sure that your narrative is covering not just what those items are, but like if it's a type of item, things like that. You want to make sure that those things are outlined. Again, I can't say it enough. When we do invoicing, we are looking at your proposed budget and we are comparing it to what you put in your invoice. So if you did not budget for bus passes, say you budgeted for supportive services, but you did not specify what that meant, then your invoice is going to be held up because we may need to ask you questions. Well, what does this mean? And what does that mean? Well, you didn't put that in your budget. So you want to think as broadly as you can about what some of those services are going to be, but you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into a box. So it's going to be a fine dance to do. Again, we do understand that this is a proposed budget. There's definitely room to make modifications if necessary, or if you forgot to budget for something that you decide is a relevant feature that you need in your program, incentives and things like that. You can always do a budget modification, but I cannot emphasize enough to really pay attention to how you're proposing your budget, because that does go back to how we invoice. And if I can add one more caveat, I will also say, just to remember that just because your package is approved and awarded for funding, it does not mean that your budget has been formally approved. Anything that you put in your budget is still subject to staff review before we approve those expenditures through invoicing. So I do want to make sure that you keep that in mind as well as you are preparing your budget. Non-governmental organizations, same thing. In this section, you want to make sure that you're identifying who those NGOs are that you're intending to work with and what you intend to do with those organizations. It's pretty self-explanatory, I think, in the template here, and making sure that you're identifying the expenditures and how those funds are going to be used to support program outcomes. Make sure that you are utilizing your narrative section to provide that information as well. One of the things to also note, if you know you plan to work with a community partner but haven't quite selected that partner, if you know like what services you want them to utilize, you can certainly put it here. Description of subcontract would be to be determined, but we know we want somebody to provide tutoring services, and we know we want to allocate $5,000 to that. So you can put it there as a TBD if you are so inclined. Equipment and fixed assets. Equipment and fixed assets are non-expendable property, having a useful life of more than 1 year and acquisition cost of $5,000 or more per unit. This is where you're going to put things like vehicles or any other equipment that of course cost more than $5,000 a year. Caveat to that, any expenses over $3,500 per the grant guide will require prior approval from BSCC staff or the field rep. So make sure that you are aware of that as you are preparing your budget. Equipment and fixed assets included in the proposed budget does not guarantee approval. So just keep that in mind as well. Separate and prior approval from the BSCC will be required prior to purchase. Cannot emphasize that enough. Prior to purchase. I would hate for you to go out and purchase a van, even though it was in your budget, but you did not get prior approval, and then that cost can't be reimbursed. So make sure that you guys are aware of what requires prior approval, even though it's in your budget. Data collection and progress reporting. As we've talked a few times, we do not have a evaluation component required for this particular grant, but we do encourage that you are collecting the data so that you can certainly share outcomes with us. And we'll understand like how your project has been effective in the community. If you are allocating resources for that project or for that process, this is where you would document that part of your budget. Financial audit, the key thing to know here is, yes, it will be required for this project. Your audit will be due August 31st of 2025. I think I got that date right. And the BSCC will allow you to allocate up to $25,000 of your grant in order to cover the cost of the financial audit. And that's where you would document that here. And remember that that audit does have to be facilitated by a CPA, certified public accountant. Other, for lack of a better word, this is kind of going to be your catch-all. So if you have costs to itemize that don't quite fit into any of the other categories, it's not quite services and supplies, it's not quite professional services, we're not sure what we want to call it, we can capture it in other. Again, at a minimum, make sure you do budget for 2 trips to Sacramento for grantee team meetings. Again, similar costs, those costs that you don't know how to capture anywhere else for your sub-grantees or subcontractors, they would go in those applicable budget sections. So professional services or NGO, that's where you capture all of the costs associated with sub-grantees or subcontractors. Out-of-state travel using grant funding, again, I'll say it is monitored very closely. So if you do intend for out-of-state travel for your grant, please make sure that you have received prior approval from the BSCC before you purchase travel, even if you did stipulate it in your budget. We do have some really strict rules around out-of-state travel. So we have to make sure that we are appropriately allocating those dollars in line with what our state requirements allow. And then the indirect cost section, section 9 of your budget is for indirect costs. Indirect costs are those shared costs that cannot be directly assigned to a particular activity, but they are necessary to the operation of the organization and project performance. BSCC is allowing 2 cost options for the ARG project, or 2 indirect cost options, excuse me. When you are preparing your budget, you can account for 10% of direct salaries and wages, including or excluding benefits, that's your choice. Or you can allow for 5% of the actual total direct project cost, excluding equipment. We do understand that 10% or 5% is not necessarily sufficient to cover all of the indirect cost expenses that you may incur in taking on this project. The idea of the ESC is to get this money into the hands of the community-based organizations so that you can provide as much direct service as possible. That was one of the reasons they went to the advanced payment model, to make sure that you weren't trying to front all that money and then, you know, trying to cover expenses, et cetera, et cetera. This way you get that advanced payment, you can start managing your project, but unfortunately it does not allow you to recoup all of your costs. I think what I've been hearing over the year has been most people are looking at like 15 to 17% for their indirect costs. Well, we'll allow of this budget either 10% of salaries or 5% of total project costs. So please make sure that you consider that as you are putting together your application, and make sure that you select the option that is best for your project focus. Any questions?
So this is a multi-part question. So I'll just go one by one.
Okay.
So can you please clarify the letters of support and are letters required?
Letters of support, and are they required? Is that the question? Did I hear that right?
Yes, if you could just clarify what the letters of support are and if they are required is the first question.
Yes. So letters of support would be if you are partnering, pardon me for turning my head, I'm trying to grab my checklist again. If your proposal, and I'm just going to read it from line 11 of your checklist on page 17. If the proposal includes collaboration and active involvement with a local government agency for which their agreement is needed, a letter of support signed by the agency head must be received from the agency. A letter of support is only required if you are partnering with a local government agency and you need their agreement in order to implement your project. So for example, if in your project you are proposing that you are going to be partnering with the probation department and they're going to be giving you referrals, you need to have communicated with that probation department, gotten their agreement to provide you referrals, and have that demonstrated to us in a letter of support. Otherwise, you know, we don't want you to believe you're going to be able to get it, and then that government agency is unable to fulfill that requirement, and then you end up with trouble being able to fulfill your grant agreement because you can't get the referrals from how you intended to get them. So that's what that letter of support is all about. If you are not partnering with government agencies, then the letter of support is not necessary, and that's where that assurance of government agreement comes in, and you identify, you check that box that says, we do not intend to partner with a government agency, so we do not have any letters of support to submit.
So going through the rest of the questions that they asked, it's kind of going to overlap a little bit of what you said, but I want to make sure we clarify it. So they also asked how many letters would they need?
As many as they intend to partner with.
And then are letters accepted only from those entities who are directly associated with our proposed program?
Can you only submit letters from people who you are collaborating with?
Yeah,
Sounds
it says
like
directly associated.
Yeah. Your letters of support, as noted, should be from those that you are collaborating with. Again, you are welcome to put, it's your proposal package. The scoring panel will receive the documents that are listed in the checklist.
And then it says, would letters from entities not direct partners for the ARG be accepted?
Say that question again. I think that was the same answer I just gave, but say it again.
I just said, would letters from entities not direct partners for the ARG be accepted?
Yeah, I think that's the same answer. Yeah. So yes, you can, again, you can submit whatever you think is important for your package, but again, just keep in mind what the scoring panel will receive. The scoring panel is only going to receive information that is pertinent to the implementation of your project.
Can we attach other supporting documents, data, and other materials?
You can attach, it's your proposal package. You can attach, but again, just keep in mind of what the scoring panel will receive.
Do unpaid organizations who are partners need to be identified in the grant?
Unpaid organizations who are partners?
Yes.
So let me talk this out real quick and make sure I'm understanding. It sounds like they're asking if I'm partnering with an organization, but they're not going to be receiving funding through the grant for the services that they're providing, do they need to be identified? Is that the question?
Yes. Hi, this is Victoria. That's exactly the question.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. They should be identified because they are going to be impacting your service. So you should be including them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we put an outside evaluator in professional services or in data collection?
I would leave that to your choice. I don't think it's not a hard and fast. I will leave that to your choice on how you best see to stipulate that in your budget.
If our agency already has a CPA, are we required to include those costs in the budget?
No, you are not required to include, you get to choose what you want to include in your budget. We don't require you to put anything. We ask you to decide what you need to fund your project based on what you're proposing, and you decide what needs to go in the budget. We don't give you that level of instruction one way or the other.
Does the advance payment model mean getting the money in total upfront?
No, your advance payment model means that it will be distributed in thirds. So you'll get 1/3, within 75 days of contract execution. And then the second third you'll get upon approved invoices that document you are spent down at 80% of the first disbursement. That probably didn't come out right. But after you have spent down 80% of your previous disbursement and your invoices have been approved, that document that has been the expenditure, then you can request your second advance. and the same thing for the third.
This says 10% of salaries or 5% of what category?
Project, total project cost. So it would either be 10% of salaries or 5% of your total budget minus equipment.
We have a fiscal sponsor who requires a fee of 15%. Where does this belong in the budget?
Say that one more time.
We have a fiscal sponsor who requires a fee of 15%. Where does this belong in the budget?
I think I'm going to have to take that question because I know we have some other questions pending around fiscal sponsorship and eligibility. So let me take that question, and I'm going to ask specifically for that person if you would submit that question to me via the mailbox, ARG warm handoff at bscc.ca.gov, so that I can make sure, you know, we take that question and I get that, because I know we have some other questions around fiscal sponsorship, and I want to make sure that we get all of those answered appropriately for you.
Is the $25,000 for CPA separate or part of the $500,000?
Oh, that would be included. That's of the $500,000 that you are allowed to request. $25,000 of that can be allocated for your financial audit.
And that's all the questions in the chat.
Adriana, anything for you?
Nothing, no hands raised or no emails.
Awesome sauce. Cooking with gas. We're almost done, you guys. We are going to talk a little bit about just a quick review of what you need to submit to complete your proposal package. Make sure that you have your proposal cover sheet. I think Ashley covered that. It's on page 16. You want to make sure you have that proposal checklist. We've talked about it quite a bit throughout this discussion. So make sure you pull page 17, read all 13 of those points, and make sure that you have very specifically covered each one of those pieces when you are putting your final package together to email to us. Make sure that you complete that applicant information form, which is 2 pages, pages 19 and 20. And that's where you're going to give us some general information about your organization, who you've identified as your project director, financial officer, et cetera, a brief summary of what your project description is. All of that is what goes in that applicant information form. I will encourage you to make sure that you review it a couple of times. Make sure you do not have any errors, or you didn't miss filling in any particular sections on that application. And the other thing I'll remind you all is that you do need to make sure that your requests are consistent. So don't ask for $500,000 in your proposal package and then in your budget ask for $450,000. So you want to make sure that your requests are consistent throughout your application. Make sure you read all of those points in the proposal narrative. Ashley shared with you sections 1 through 4 and how those rating factors are broken down. Make sure you read those closely as you begin developing your responses. Pay attention to the wording. Make sure that you've done your research for your evidence-based practices and interventions. Make sure you're able to clearly define what it is that you intend to do and how it is that you intend to do it. And make sure that you're doing it all in the 9 pages that we've allowed. Make sure your proposal budget table and narrative is completed in the Excel budget table, and make sure that that does not exceed 4 pages. Your certificate of compliance, your debarment, fraud, theft, and embezzlement form, make sure that you have that completed and attached. Make sure that you have completed your registration verification of your 501c3. Again, here's that link one more time, and it is active in the electronic version of the PDF. Make sure that you complete that work plan. The work plan is a required document. Your governing board resolution that indicates signing authority, that is important. And yes, if they are the same document, that is acceptable. Make sure if your proposal includes collaboration, like we were just talking about, if you have letters of support, if you're working with a government agency, and you need to make sure that they are agreeing with the proposal, you have to have letters of support from that agency head. And then if you do not have any government agency that you are partnering with, make sure your Assurance of Government Organizations agreement indicates as such. There is a section on the bottom just before the signature block where you check that, no, we are not partnering with government agencies, and then that will complete the requirement for 11 and 12. Number 13 is an optional document. If you do choose to submit a project flow chart, you are welcome to do so. And it is not included as part of the 9 pages, okay? But that will be included in what the scoring panel will receive. Applicants, make sure when you submit your proposal that you submit an electronic copy to our email box. Make sure that you have signed your copy or your proposal application. You can use a digital signature, or you can print that page out, do a wet signature, and then scan that whole package back in and email us. We have to receive your signed proposal by 5 p.m. on February 5th, 2021. There's the email address that package is going to. I cannot indicate enough that proposals received after the due date and time will not be considered. So please, please, please get those applications in. We have plenty of money that we want to use to support the community. So please, please, please get those applications in so we can get some more good things happening out there.
Tanya, could I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Sorry, just from prior experience, I know they're big packets you're sending in. So even though it's due at 5 o'clock, send it before then, because it may take some time to transmit through our security filters and things like that. And you're in too. So like, just to be safe, make sure to send it in, as early as possible, just because we don't want to eliminate you because it's, right on the line or whatever. So just something to consider when you're sending it in.
Good point. Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. I have certainly heard those stories as well. So as Ashley said, make sure that if you don't wait until 4:55 to hit send. As much as you can, plan to have your document into us as much ahead of 5 o'clock as you possibly can. If you have any additional questions about the ARG grant or this RFP, please feel free to email me. My email is on the screen, as well as our electronic mailbox, which you probably are all going to be hearing in your sleep now that we have said it so many times throughout this presentation. Last time on your to-do list, make sure that you read your RFP multiple times. Make sure you are familiar with the program requirements. Please take time to make sure you're familiar with the rating factors and the criteria. I cannot emphasize enough, if you want to score well, make sure that you have addressed those points in those various sections 1 through 4. Design your program, use your evidence-based practices, utilize the resources that we've provided for you that are available to you. And I may not have said it earlier, but we also have some stuff on our website that you can also go to that will allow you to get some more information on evidence-based practices and things like that as well. So please use those resources that are there for you. Make sure you identify and select the services, resources, and providers that you need in order to have an effective project. Develop your work plan and follow the proposal submittal instructions to the letter. Now time for the big questions. Are there any?
So we have quite a few more questions in the chat. This one is kind of a repeat we can go over again. Where can I get the information where you are referring to the different page numbers in the PowerPoint presentation? And will we be able to go back and look at the Zoom presentation?
Okay, ask the first part again. Where can I get the numbers?
The different page numbers and the PowerPoint presentation. I think they're just basically asking if they'll be able to see the PowerPoint.
Okay, yeah, you will be able to access the PowerPoint. I believe probably early next week, Monday, Tuesday, we'll be able to have it up. The page numbers that I covered are referenced on the PowerPoint, but truthfully, I just really we just walked through the entire PowerPoint, the entire RFP page by page for the most part. If there are particular sections that you're looking for, you can certainly utilize the table of contents in the RFP to find that page number and reference it that way if that's helpful. I'm thinking I'm answering your question correctly. If not, please let us know. But yes, you will be able to get access to the PowerPoint. Certainly everything we discussed is verbatim in the RFP.
This says 2 files submitted, package and separate spreadsheet. So I think they mean, are the 2 files the submitted package and separate spreadsheet, if I'm correct?
I don't know that I'm understanding the question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's my question. I'll say, so there's a spreadsheet. In previous grants, you'd require the package, a PDF of all the narrative stuff in the package and the forms, but then the actual budget spreadsheet, which is a separate sort of document, would be submitted as a second file in the email transmittal. Or do we print the Excel and make it all part of one gigantic PDF?
No, that is such a great question. I am so glad you asked that. Thank you. Yes, please attach your budget as an Excel document.
So 2 files.
So 2 files.
Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. So I hope everybody caught that. Please attach your budget as an Excel document to your submission along with your PDF application proposal package. I'm sorry.
And make sure that your narrative's expanded so that when it's printed out, you can actually see what you have written as well. So, no.
Does the digital or the wet signature have to be blue?
Oh, it's blue.
Yeah, I think they're just referencing, it would be the wet signature is what we're asking to be blue. I don't think we would make you go into the PDF.
Yeah, the wet signature is blue. Yeah, we don't have any specifics for the digital signature. My apologies.
This says, is a flow chart similar to a logic model?
I am going to say, in my experience, I'm going to say not necessarily, but I am going to leave that to your discretion on how you want to utilize those pieces for your submission.
And that's looking like all of the questions that are in the chat.
Okay. Anything else for you, Adriana?
I have nothing in the email and I see no raise of hands.
All right. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your time and attention. Thank you for hanging out and getting the information. I wish you all best of luck in your solicitation process. And remember, if you have any additional questions about the RFP or the ARG grant, please feel free to reach out. Utilize the ARG email box, or you can email me directly. Thank you so much, and you all have a wonderful holiday season and a great rest of your day.